Hey, it's Ryan from Ryonet, and today we're going to show you how to expose a screen using the sun. So the sun is a great source of UV light, which is actually what exposes unexposed emulsion. Unfortunately, a lot of times, like here in Washington, the sun doesn't work, but today in August, the sun's working great. So the best time to expose a screen in the sun is in the middle of the day, high noon. You're going to get the most concentrated UV rays. Because the sun is actually very strong in UV rays, it does do a pretty good job of exposing a screen. For instance, this is a dual cure emulsion. If you're going to be exposing in the sun, I would always recommend using a dual cure emulsion. The reason is that the single part emulsions, or what's called the photopolymer emulsions, pre-sensitized, you don't do the mixing of the diazo in those emulsions. They're very fast exposing and they're not forgiving. Whereas a dual cure emulsion, the type that you take the diazo and you mix it in, is very forgiving when it comes to exposure. So that's why, because we're not always in the same parameters under the sun, we would want to use a dual cure emulsion. Now, we're also going to show you how to do an easy test using this dual cure emulsion because we're going to expose this screen at roughly 2 minutes. But to dial it in, we're going to expose it at 150. Then we'll take an opaque shutter, put that off. That will expose for 2 minutes. Then I'll move the opaque shutter down here, and that will expose at 2 minutes, 10 seconds. So it'll give us a replication of what it would look like under these 3 different times. Now, we've also chosen an image that has some detail but also has some spot color to it. So spot color, as you see, is like the Ryonet, a vector graphic, but it also has some halftone detail there. So we can really see how the sun would handle the detail. Now, I'm thinking that because positive contact is so important in exposure, and what that means is that this mesh and this film, they have to be pressed so close together, because if it's just left to hang out like that, you're going to lose the detail because the light's going to go right around it. I'm thinking because positive contact is so important, we're going to take a piece of glass and we're going to set that glass down on top of our exposure surface in order to make sure that we get some positive contact there. But this is a couple pounds of pressure. A vacuum will put about 50 pounds of pressure. So let's see how it works, and that way you can get a representation of what the sun would do to halftone exposure. Let's head outside and go ahead and expose this guy. Before we go outside, I actually have a piece of cardboard that's protecting the bottom of my screen so light doesn't bounce off the black top or get on the back of the screen when I walk outside. And then I have my opaque shutter, which I'm going to use as my step wedge test. This is just a sheet of aluminum essentially. It's very thin, so it doesn't give us a lot of light refraction on the top of that. So let's go ahead and outside and start this exposure. Okay, we're going to start the timer when I take the sheet off, and we're going to go for 1 minute, 50 seconds, 2 minutes, and 2:10. There we go. Okay, we're almost to the timer. We're going to do our step wedge test. So at 150, we put it over here, and I'm going to just hold that down, making sure I'm not in any shadows above it. And then at 2 minutes, now I'm going to move that up here. And then at 2:10, right now, I'm just going to cover the whole thing up. So our exposure is complete. Let's go rinse it out and see how we did. Now, because we did some halftones and some fine detail with the screen, we did use a little bit higher mesh. We used a 230 mesh. When we go to rinse this out, it's very important that we rinse this out in a light-safe or dim environment. If we were rinsing this out right now in the sun, that sun would continue to expose the screen. So what we'd want to do is we want to rinse it out in the shade, in the evening, in a controlled environment like this is a light-safe dark room, of course, with yellow light in it. But first of all, we actually see our exposure there, so we actually did successfully expose, we know, but let's see how it rinsed out. So I'm going to get the screen wet on both sides and then let it soak. The sun didn't work too bad. As you can see, we did lose, if you look at our halftone scale right there, we did lose a lot of halftones. We lost our 5% dots, definitely. But, if you look at the image itself, we got a lot of the halftones to expose. So it's not optimal, but it definitely worked. We got pretty crisp lines, we got our detail, and it rinsed right out. As far as the difference in the exposure times, you can tell that up here is a little bit more slimy. Down here is a little less slimy. So optimal exposure for this would probably be a little bit longer, probably in that 210 range, whereas this was 150. But overall, I think it did a pretty good job. I mean, you can tell that there's a little bit of haziness or cloudiness around some of that definition up there. It's not super crisp. That's what you're going to get without a lot of positive contact, but you know, sun, you did a great job. Now, we're going to use the sun again to actually post-harden this screen. Let's head out there one more time. All right, so we're outside again with our friend the sun, and I'm just going to dab the water off this screen, being careful not to dab any of the halftones off, because you don't want typical water to dry there. Then I'm just going to set the screen out like that to harden up. The sun does an amazing job of drying the screen and also hardening the screen so it lasts through production. So there we have it, exposing this screen with the sun. It worked today. I think it came out pretty good. So for all you DIY screen printers out there, have fun, don't get sunburnt.